Al principio de la película comentaba ella que, bueno, que sus trabajos estaban más vinculados al fotoperiodismo, ha estado en multitud de conflictos internacionales. Sus fotografías han sido expuestas en grandes museos, ha tenido reconocimiento de la crítica internacional a nivel fotográfico, premios. Y hay un momento en la película donde ella dice que ve una manada de elefantes y ahí un poco decide cómo cambiar un poco lo que venía siendo su trabajo, más dedicado a estos conflictos, con tratar los temas medioambientales, ¿no? Entonces, la primera pregunta que le quería hacer a Kate era, primero, ¿qué se produjo en ti cuando viste esa manada de elefantes y cambiaste un poco esa forma de plantear tu trabajo, llevarlo de esos conflictos bélicos a lo que está ocurriendo en el mundo a nivel de la conservación de los animales? Y por otro lado, ¿por qué cambiaste el soporte fotográfico por el cinematográfico?
Well, I would say when I had that experience, it was in 2010, and I was embedded with a medevac unit in Afghanistan with the U.S. military and photographing double and triple amputees and Afghan civilian casualties for a number of days on end. And I went to Kenya. It was on a long-planned vacation, and I was really struggling with all of the inhumanity and tragedy that I had documented. And it was seeing this herd of elephants that, it just happened in sort of an instant where it just sort of realigned my everything inside of me. It was very incredibly healing. And I would just say that, it gave me this larger sense that in spite of all the human destruction on the planet, that there's still a natural order and that it's necessary for us to do everything we can to protect that. So that was the motivation that led me to begin focusing on wildlife and environmental issues. And in terms of gravitating from still photography to filmmaking, so it was actually in the same time period that I had this experience with my first experience in Africa and had been on this medevac unit in bed. I was asked to work on a documentary called The Boxing Girls of Kabul, which was about the Afghan women's national boxing team. And I was brought on the project as a cinematographer. And I just really enjoyed working as a crew. Photography is incredibly individualistic. And I loved the process. And then I just found myself feeling more and more that I couldn't express what I want to say in the world any longer through photographs. And I decided when embarking on this project that it had to be a film, and this is the first film I've ever directed.
Cuando planteas un proyecto de este tipo, supongo que es difícil a nivel de guión, generar un guión previo. Seguramente trabajes con algunas escaletas, algunas ideas. ¿Cuánto modificaste del proyecto inicial que tenías una vez estabas en el rodaje en todos estos lugares?
Well, I started the project, so I did a fellowship at the University of Michigan in 2012-13, and that's where I did the research before starting the filming of this project. And I was the environmental fellow, and I was accepted as the environmental fellow with a background in conflict. And a department of the University of Michigan reached out to me, seeing my background and seeing that I was the environment fellow, and said, given your background in conflict, perhaps you might consider looking at the links between the ivory trade and terrorism. And I was already thinking about doing a project on poaching, so immediately decided that would be my focus. And I went off to Kenya, and the first month of filming in July 2013 was a lot of preliminary interviews, starting to build relationships, doing sort of background and research. And what I found on that trip, I spent a lot of time with the northern white rhinos, which I was not expecting, but I understood through that trip that, well, many of the leading conservationists are in Kenya, and also the northern white rhinos are there, and it is one of the biggest hubs for ivory trafficking in Africa. That the places that essentially, it led me to want to go to Central Africa, to the DRC, where the northern white rhinos had gone extinct in the last 10 years, and where the elephants in Garamba National Park are under constant threat due to the various militia groups operating in the park.
En esos espacios donde estuviste, a nivel de, bueno, del equipo humano que realizó la película, o sea, cuéntanos un poco cómo fue ese proceso y si realmente tuviste fácil acceso a estos espacios para hacer un tipo de documental como este, que no deja de ser un documental crítico y que, bueno, que afecta o que genera muchos conflictos alrededor.
We worked generally I was working in a very small crew, so there was 2 to 3 of us at any one time. So we had a very light footstep, and in a lot of the more difficult situations, we were filming with SLR cameras. So those are essentially still cameras that now shoot video, which means it's much easier to get into sensitive situations, and people are less self-conscious. And it was, but there were certainly a lot of challenges, and Garamba National Park is a very difficult place to get to. It's probably one of the most remote places on the planet. So to go there, you go to Uganda, then to Entebbe, then an internal flight, then you cross the border. One time we did it by car, another time we did it by foot, and then on the other side of the border, you take a chartered flight into the park.
Pudiste grabar, por lo que vimos en la película, momentos muy complejos para bueno, pues seguramente para los guardas que están en todas estas zonas. ¿Piensas que toda esta gente que cuida en todos estos parques nacionales está casi igual entre comillas, en peligro de extinción también? O sea, es muy duro su trabajo ahí en estos espacios.
Well, it's interesting. Today is World Ranger Day, and one of the sort of facts in the film is that over 1,000 rangers have been killed in the past 10 years, and in the past year you have over 100 rangers who've been killed in Africa. So you're looking at, a ranger being killed in Africa, on average every 3 days. And when you consider that, for the most part, park rangers traditionally have been trained as park rangers, as sort of scouts, and looking after a park. And increasingly, they're having to learn military skills in order to protect the park and in order to protect the wildlife there. Very often, they're ill-equipped. And it's not in the film, but there was a defector from the Lord's Resistance Army who we interviewed, and he had been kidnapped when he was a child. And he was taken to Garamba, and he was actually in the park for a period of time with Joseph Kony when they were operating in the park. And, it took him many years in order to be able to escape one night and have enough bearings with his surroundings in the wilderness to know how to escape. But what he had said is, the park rangers, compared to us, were very ill-equipped. They were easy targets for us.
Supongo que en el momento que te encuentras con todo este material rodado en postproducción, en una sala de montaje, se hará difícil, ¿no?, empezar a ordenar todo ese puzzle, porque, bueno, aparte vemos que has grabado en diferentes países, con lo que complica eso, los diferentes idiomas que habrás tenido que trabajar en la mesa de postproducción. ¿Cómo fue esa parte de la película?
Parts of that process were very frustrating and parts of it were very exciting. I don't know if you probably, I don't know how popular there are anywhere anymore, but Rubik's Cubes. You know? It's a little bit like a Rubik's Cube, putting the film together and moving pieces around. And there's this expression, sometimes it's used in photography, it's used in film too, about having to kill your darlings. And very often, you know, there are scenes and there are moments that you just have to get rid of for the sake of, you know, the story at large and for the flow of the film. So it requires a lot of time and a lot of patience. And because the film was in 5 languages, I literally have boxes and boxes of transcripts, and there was lots of time spent reviewing. And there are various people on my team, even though I'm a first-time filmmaker. The writer who worked with me on the film is someone who I sort of deeply admire, who's worked on a number of amazing films. And I originally went to him because he was the writer on a movie called The Cove, which I think is one of the best wildlife sort of hard documentaries that's ever been made. And his support and the support of a few other people in particular, we worked through it.
Vamos a dar también paso al público si desean hacer alguna pregunta. Hay micrófono por ahí.
Kate, I want to thank you for this amazing work. I have been crying like half of the film. And I definitely share your passion with wildlife. I went several times to Africa, and since the first time, it really changed my life and my philosophy of life. I am a choreographer and clinical psychologist. And I'm working since a year and something in a project about wildlife and more in a philosophical position. And I have some questions for you in the documentary. One of them is that it seems to me that sometimes I could feel that zoos could be an option. And we here in Tenerife, we have a major lobby called Loro Parque, completely involved in capturing wildlife and trafficking also. And for me, it's dangerous to think that first we kill the wildlife, we end not only with traffic, but also not only with poaching, but also not allowing them to live because they don't have space, right? So destruction of habitats and so on. But then, because we want to save the ones that are remaining, then we put them on a zoo so we can reproduce them. And in my perspective towards what is an elephant, what is any kind of living creature, I'm wondering if that's not amazingly unfair. Because these ones also are not having dignity. There is not a quality in living. And I'm wondering if the lack of ability to reproduce, it's because they are in zoos. And so the ability, it's lost somehow. This I'm not sure. I wanted to also ask you that. And then my last observation has to do with the fact, I was wondering, what can we do, not only about marfil and like not buying it, but also what about our consume habits? Like, how could we be more aware of the fact that, for example, eating meat and consuming dairy, we are also producing this kind of effects because of the impact that cattle has in the entire world, and because of the loss of habitats, and because of cattle industry, it's also a huge and quite dirty industry. And I wanted to know if in any moment in the process of the documentary you thought also about other facts that are, you know, less evidence but also really important. And my last observation would be that it's very curious to me how we humans tend to measure all the time the planet regarding to our own losses. So, for example, when the politics are talking about the animals, they are talking about the rangers that are being lost. And it's missing to me all the time an awareness where the life of an animal, it's worth so much as the life of a human. And we are not comparing or like putting value in it because of how many human lives are lost, which of course it's also happening, because definitely this is a problem that affects also the most poor countries and the most poor human collectives in the world. That's all. Thank you.
Well, I'm going to start with, what can be done. It's very interesting. In the last few years, there's been a record number of ivory seizures coming through Europe and made in Europe. So typically it's people coming from Africa with suitcases full of ivory and transiting through Europe to go to Asia. And so it's very, very important actually that that Europe make sure that it has, the toughest and strongest anti-trafficking laws. And I always think this is a really great example. But there's a story about a wildlife trafficker who had previously been convicted for cocaine smuggling. And he was caught coming into the airport in Amsterdam with several birds in his underpants that were all valued at about 7,000 euros a piece. So he essentially had the equivalent of a kilo of cocaine in his underwear, except that because it was wildlife, the risks and the prosecution are so much less than if he was prosecuted for trafficking drugs. So I think it's very, very critical that countries really work very hard to recognize environmental crime is truly criminal behavior, because you need to have very strong deterrence. So there's that. At the same time, in recent years, Europe has been the largest exporter of ivory. So this is ivory from before the CITES ban, so meaning, pre-convention, so pre-1990, and antique ivory. But most of this ivory in Europe is being sent to Asia. And it's just a very sort of curious position to be in, because on the one hand, there is recognition that the illegal ivory trade in Asia needs to stop, and on the other hand, Europe has been sending huge amounts of the ivory that it can legally export to Asia, stimulating the demand and the buying there. So, as you see at the end of the film, CITES now says that, the general consensus is that it's critical that all countries close their ivory markets. It doesn't matter any longer whether something is antique, whether it's pre-convention. We need to fully stop trading ivory. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done still in Europe. And I really hope that this film will help people pay more attention to this issue and understand why it's so important. And even though, for the most part, it's ivory being trafficked through Europe and not Europeans consuming ivory, it's also incredibly important for this movement of shutting down markets across the world, and it being a symbolic and also a progression in human consciousness. So that's what people can do in Europe, and I think it's great that there are very concrete steps that can be taken. That it's not about donating money to help different conservation groups. This is really about law and legislation and law enforcement, because if there's no framework for the law, then there's no way to enforce the law. And that has a lot to do with what's happened over the last, what's happened since the international trade ban on ivory, because you had this international trade ban, and I personally, it was one of the things that struck me most when I was really getting into this film. I feel like it was, I think people were so hopeful and so optimistic, but also somewhat naive, and thinking, okay, we have an international trade ban and now the trade of ivory is going to stop. And it did for a period of time, but then you had this, the Asian economy, basically, you know, a growth in the middle class and expendable income and people wanting to invest money, and ivory is something that typically has had cultural value in Asia. And so there was started to be a demand for ivory again, but you had individual countries that were still allowing the ivory trade, or countries like Kenya. When I started this project, the maximum penalty for somebody in possession of ivory in Kenya was 1 to 2 years in prison, but typically speaking, nobody got sentenced, and a $350 fine. So what you would see is lots of recidivist poachers slap on the wrist, you shouldn't poach anymore. They go back to poaching, somebody pays their fine for them. So what happened with Faisal was really historic in Kenya. In terms of zoos, I mean, I think in an ideal world, you know, animals would just be living in the wild, but the reality of the world that we live in is that it is increasingly important that there are sort of backup populations, and there, you know, at the San Diego Zoo, you see all the sort of vials in the frozen zoo, and you know, the northern white rhino is just one of many animals and species that they're working with to bring back from the edge of extinction. And there's been a lot of success stories where you've had species that really are on the brink of extinction and they've been brought back. So I think that we are at a point in history where, you know, unfortunately, all of these mechanisms are going to be necessary until the illegal wildlife trade stops and, you know, the protection of habitat is truly respected.
I will speak in English. Congratulations, Kate. I really am impressed with the documentary. I think it has been a great opportunity for us here in Tenerife to see this. I was shocked because I saw Sudan last year in Olpejeta, and I realized there that it was too late for the rhino. So now we have to look for the elephants. You are right. So that's the goal we have to achieve. Don't you think that seeing the documentary that there are two very concentrated points for all this business? It is not, apart from banning the consumption all over the world, that you cannot do something there, stronger laws, more control in the traffic or whatever, that is more effective than waiting that everybody in the world is stopping consumption of ivory?
Yeah, I wish there was, you know, I think if there was one single solution that it would have been utilized. I mean, it really, it's a crisis, and it really requires a multi-pronged approach. So you have groups and individuals working at reducing consumer demand in Asia, and that's absolutely critical. And it is, in fact, it has in fact been working. But if that alone was what we were relying on, it would be too late. You also need laws and legislation, the most vulnerable populations being protected. You need the rangers being well trained. And I think collectively, that can make a difference. China committing to banning the ivory trade this year is a huge step forward. There will, of course, continue to be an illegal trade, and a lot of that trade is going to Vietnam that has a very porous border with China, and so there's a lot of illegal ivory trade going on between Vietnam and China. But it's certainly when you know that ivory is no longer legal to sell, it makes it much easier for law enforcement agents to crack down, because they're not there having to try to figure out, wait, is this legal ivory or is this illegal ivory? Because the only way that you can tell the date of a piece of ivory is by doing carbon dating, which is very expensive and not very practical. Hong Kong is in the process of, working through their ivory ban, which is anticipated to be in 2021. I think it would be, be wonderful if it happened much sooner. I'm very excited. We're actually going to Hong Kong in early September, so we're going to be screening the film there. So we're getting to a point where we're able to realize some of our impact goals and take it to the places where I think it's most critical that it's seen. Sure.
Hola Kate, me llamo Justo y en primer lugar quiero agradecerte este documento tan dramático, pero tan dramático que me ha afectado, ¿no? Te hablo con el corazón. Permíteme que te trate de tú porque me siento muy cercano a ti desde el corazón. Tratarte de usted sería poner una concertina entre tú y yo, ¿no? Entonces, yo creo que todo esto sí está muy bien, todo lo que se hace, pero desde altas esferas, desde grandes reuniones, se piensa con la parte izquierda del cerebro, con la parte racional, ¿entiendes? No con las emociones. Yo creo que este documento debería de ponerse en los colegios a los niños, que las emociones están prácticamente formándose, que serán los que tomarán el relevo en un tiempo, ¿no? En todos los colegios este documento, aunque sea dramático y digan que para los niños no es conveniente, pero lo que no es conveniente es que todo el día con tablets, con móviles, con toda esa historia. Hace unos meses, en un congreso de informadores, el presidente de Google dice que cada 2 días se genera más información que desde los albores de la humanidad. Y todo eso no deja que pensemos, nos dan todo pensado, ¿no? Y aquí tú nos estás demostrando la punta del iceberg. Los de abajo, los que disparan para proteger y los que disparan para asesinar. Luego los comerciantes que están enlazados con los traficantes, con terrorismo. Luego están otras altas esferas, están gobiernos, están los pensamientos fríos. Y en la pirámide luego hay un puñado de psicópatas que manejan el mundo entero, ¿no? Y estamos viviendo una mentira en realidad. Yo creo que esto se debe empezar por los colegios, concienciar a los niños desde pequeñitos, pero con las emociones del corazón. No con el lóbulo izquierdo del cerebro, que es frío, calculador, gano más, gano menos, pierdes tú, gano yo, ¿entiendes? Yo creo que sí, todo este trabajo es muy bueno, es fantástico, a mí me ha emocionado mucho. Y como canario africano te lo agradezco, ¿no? Pero yo creo que el paradigma newtoniano se está acabando ya con el nuevo paradigma cuántico, ¿no? Que es totalmente distinto el pensamiento. Y ahí es donde yo creo que tiene escape la humanidad, si no nos vamos todos a pique. El día que nos demos cuenta de que los billetes no se pueden comer es cuando nos daremos cuenta de lo que estamos haciendo. Gracias. En realidad no es ningún problema.
I couldn't agree more about the importance of children. I often think because of the scene, the poaching scene, or the scene with the poachers who've been shot, that maybe it's not appropriate for children under 13, but I think it is very important that, high school students see this film, and, it's certainly one of the things that we're committed to ensuring to happen, and also bringing the film around Africa to the heads of state, but also doing grassroots screenings.
Vamos a hacer 2 últimas preguntas.
Gracias, Kate. Yo hablo en español. Voy a intentar hacerlo en muy poquitos segundos. Yo creo que para atacar este problema hay que ir a la raíz. y la raíz del problema son las creencias absurdas que todavía dominan nuestra sociedad. Podemos poner el ejemplo de los asiáticos que compran pensando que son medicinas, los colmillos, etc. Pero también aparecía un crucifijo de la religión en los soldados, en los militares. Mi pregunta concreta es, ¿has pensado en estas creencias absurdas de la humanidad que son las que están moviendo las guerras, están moviendo el tráfico en este caso concreto? Y si tienes alguna idea de cómo trabajar con esas creencias para cambiarlas. Básicamente, yo creo que es la única solución que tendríamos, sería cambiar nuestra mentalidad, cambiar esas ideas absurdas que nos están moviendo, y entre ellas está el capitalismo global, que pensamos que es una solución para todo y que en el fondo es el que está moviendo todo este negocio.
I think about it all the time, and I have to say that I'm extremely concerned, particularly as an American, but who has spent most of my life, adult life, overseas. And Europe is, far more progressive and advanced in every way in regards to thinking about the environment. So the push towards electrical cars, and I think in general there's much less packaging. Just yesterday I was reading an article about how Americans on average use 500 million plastic straws every day. And these straws are going into the bellies of fish and sea life and into the nostrils of sea turtles. And I feel that there's such a huge disconnect between how rapidly we are degrading the planet and how responsible we are for what's happening. And I'm increasingly aware of every single time I'm given a straw to every single plastic cup, and wanting to be in a position where I can walk to a market and buy fresh fruit and vegetables and not have it be packaged in plastic and these things, to at least be able to limit my own plastic consumption. Because in the course of editing this film, so I was back in the US for the past year and a half, and I was just absolutely horrified on how much plastic I inadvertently was consuming on a weekly basis in the process of just going about daily life. I'm not sure I'm answering your question, but I am very happy that Europeans are looking at alternative energy, that there is people walk, people ride their bicycles, and there is a higher level of consciousness and understanding of the importance of taking action now and not at some distant date in the future.
Bueno, felicidades por tu gran trabajo, Kate. Bueno, seré muy breve. En la película se comentaba que Obama había tomado la iniciativa, una serie de iniciativas legales para acotar el comercio ilegal. Hillary Clinton también se mostraba concienciada sobre ese problema. Pero, ¿qué crees que va a pasar con Donald Trump?
I think there is a great deal of concern about what is going to happen to endangered species and the environment under the Trump administration. And I would also say, there's been this various states taking the initiative to strengthen anti-wildlife trafficking laws. When the executive order went into effect last July, I think there was probably a moment where people felt a little bit like, okay, this is dealt with. Well, the near total ban in the US deals with the interstate trade of ivory, not internally. So, and I think because people are very concerned about federal laws, particularly executive orders, and how they can be potentially undone, and also because of funding for environmental protection is also under, and wildlife protection is under threat. That it is igniting people to be, think much more locally and take more responsibility. And so these state initiatives, which are continuing, are probably just as important or more important than they were before. But overall, I think people are very worried. Yeah, but I don't know.
Bueno, bueno,
It's coming.
Pues nada, gracias por el documental. Y no sé, a veces tengo la impresión de que tenemos una visión siempre estereotipada, usamos de la imagen negativa de África, de las matanzas, de la hambruna, de la extinción de especies, pero también hay una realidad de África positiva. Es decir, la política que se ha hecho en Sudáfrica, en Botswana, en Namibia, con la recuperación del rinoceronte blanco del sur y el rinoceronte negro y las poblaciones de elefantes de los parques nacionales, es modélica. O sea, que también con esa realidad, probablemente que tenga mucho que ver con la geopolítica, ¿no? De la realidad del Parque Nacional de Garamba en el Congo, por su situación geoestratégica, en una zona muy conflictiva de África, que ha sido la causa de que no se haya podido conservar esa naturaleza en ese lugar, ¿no? Entre medio de tantos conflictos. Pero también hay otra realidad donde el rinoceronte blanco del sur, que estuvo a punto de desaparecer, ahora tenemos miles de rinocerontes blancos del sur. Rinocerontes negros también en Namibia y en Botswana y en Sudáfrica. En Zambia también. Y la población de elefantes está a rebosar en los parques nacionales que casi no caben. También habría que difundir a la gente esa realidad del África positiva, ¿no? Que no todo tiene que ser ese estereotipo que tenemos a veces, que parece que sale ya apesadumbrado de este tipo de cosas. Pero yo creo que también ese África existe también, ¿eh?
Sure, there's no question that there are great people doing great work, and there are certain countries in Africa that are exemplary, and but overall, there are a limited number of countries left in Africa that have viable elephant populations, which is a sad truth. But there are countries like Botswana that is, has a thriving elephant population, and they're doing a magnificent job at managing their elephants and their wildlife. And you have Kenya, which there's a bit of an irony there because Mombasa has been this major trafficking hub, but at the same time, Kenya was the first country to ever do a burn. It recommitted in the burn that it did last year, saying we will never, ever trade in ivory again. And I think all of that is incredibly commendable, because you still have certain African countries, South Africa and Zimbabwe in particular, that are trying to sell their ivory stockpiles. South Africa recently re-legalized the domestic rhino horn trade, which, when you consider that people are not trading rhino horn amongst each other in South Africa, there are countless cases in which you have people smuggling rhino horn out of South Africa in suitcases, diplomats moving large amounts of rhino horn out of South Africa in diplomatic pouches. Legalizing the domestic rhino horn trade is just going to make that much easier and carry on. And at the same time, the illegal poaching that you see going on is not abating. But they seem very determined to try to reap the value of their rhino horn stockpiles, of their ivory stockpiles, which I think is tremendously I think it's tremendously sad, and I think that, you know, it would be that Africa as a whole should be more united rather than this divided. You have your elephants and I have my elephants, and how you manage your population is how you do it. Because trade stimulates trade, and so when you have countries in Africa doing these one-off sales to Asia, it also stimulates the markets and results in more elephants. For example, in Garamba being killed, and the rangers who are at risk there. But there are what I would say in the process of making this film, I met some of the most extraordinary people that I've ever encountered in my life, and a number of the conservationists and how committed they are. And then in terms of the criminal networks behind the trade, I found it so incredibly dark. You know, Faisal was convicted for one ivory seizure, but he was connected to 13 multi-ton seizures. So he's a major player. And when you think about that network being involved in major drug dealing, in human trafficking, you're talking about incredibly unsavory people who are just doing very bad things in society on many different levels. So it was quite a journey for me. But
un aplauso, yo creo, para que ella agradecerle que...
Thank you.
Bueno, reiterarle de nuevo las gracias. Para nosotros es un privilegio, ¿no?, que ya haya viajado desde Los Ángeles para estar esta noche aquí con nosotros compartiendo este estreno a nivel nacional. Invitarlos a todos a que sigan de alguna manera las actividades que realizamos desde el Festival Internacional de Cine Medioambiental de Canarias, que no solo se realizan en mayo, sino a lo largo del año. Y pedirle a Kay que su próxima producción nos la envíe y la quiera estrenar aquí en Canarias. Gracias, Kay.
Well, thank you. Muchas gracias.